Hi and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm sorry about the late start and the technical hitch with Zoom and with us advertising this a little late. I want to really finish off today the final section of Wolbe, in which he speaks about Mahu Odom, what it means to be a person, and he had shifted the discussion into defining what the Mareches HaSeichel, the intellectual elements of a human being, and he spoke about the difference between Chochmah, Bina, and Das. I'll post on the chat group the link to the download in case anyone hasn't managed to download it, and then we'll start straight away. So this is the link to the handout, the PDF of the last section of Wolbe, and we're looking at the last page. Now, Wolbe spoke extensively about what Chochmah and Bina are, and then we got into discussion of what Da'as is, the third element of human mind and intellect. And Wolbe cited two sources on the second last page of the third chapter on what is a human being on the handout, two psukim that discuss the meaning of, that use the word Da'as. And I'm not going to go through them again in great detail because we've looked at them already, but he cites two separate psukim in Sefer Mishli. The first one he cites is in the 24th chapter of Mishli, in which it uses the metaphor of a house. And it says, B'chochma yibone bayis. This is Mishli chapter 24, pasuk 3. With Chochma, a house is built, u'b'svuna yiskonin, but with Bina, it's established, u'b'das chadorim yimalu. And the rooms are furnished or filled with das. So das is that which fills the rooms in the metaphor. In the second set of psukim he quotes, which is in the third chapter of Mishli, pasuk 19 and 20, it's talking about Hashem's creation of the world, and it says Hashem b'chochma yosod oretz. The founding of the world was with chochma, konen shemayim b'svuna, it's Bina which establishes the heavens, and b'dato tahomis nivko, with das the depths are plumbed, one digs deep into the depth. And what we discussed in previous weeks was that with chochma, it's the external structure, but we don't yet know how to use it. With Bina, it's established, it's the foundation, one draws out the principles, how to use it, but we don't connect with it, and it's only lived in and furnished and experiential when one has das. That's the first metaphor of the furnished house. And in the second metaphor, the earth is the metaphor of Chochmah, is what we receive from the above. The earth, if you like, is the house within which we live, the external structure. Shamayim is the abstract principles, the concepts behind it, but it doesn't penetrate into us until we arrive at das. But das, Tahomis Nivko, is the quality of da'at, knowledge which plumbs the depths and becomes part of us. So these were the psukim that he referenced. Now, we discussed extensively Chochmah and Bina, and I'm not going to go through that again, but he understands when it comes to das that each metaphor refers to a different aspect of das. Das refers to knowledge that we have, which is internal, which is part of us, part of the people that we are, and it's become part of our nature and our very way of functioning. And Wolbe says that this has two aspects to it. There's a top-down element of it, if you like, and there's a bottom-up. There's a part that's generated from within ourselves and reaches outwards, and there's a part that's from outwards and reaches within ourselves. In both cases, that ourselves is the important part. With Chochmah and Bina, it's about understanding external things, and it's the abstract, in a sense, almost objective principles. Das is about my connection to these ideas, where I am in this, something that becomes almost intimately part of me and how I function and how I see the world. And there's two sorts of Das in that context. The first sort of das are the axioms, the principles, the premises that I use to see everything else in the world. So there may be new ideas I achieve, or things I think of using rules of logic or science or insight or my understanding of the world, but the rules themselves, they come from das. They're generated from within myself. They just make sense to me because I can't think otherwise. I can't consider an alternative possibility. And this is what we call axioms or premises to the Greeks. So I can use logic to work things out, but the very rules of logic come from within myself. It just seems obvious. I can't imagine anything other than if A equals B and B equals C, then A will equal C. Or similar when it comes to moral dilemmas. It may be that we use our sense of morality to work out more complicated situations, but there's the basic moral principles, which just seem to us foundational. They're part of how we see the world and the very tools that we use to just make sense of everything. And that's one element of das. They're just part of me, and I couldn't imagine if it was otherwise. If I managed to prove to you that the laws of logic didn't make sense, or if I managed to prove to you that the basic moral principles didn't make sense, then you wouldn't know what to do with yourself. You couldn't function. It just wouldn't be me. It's so much part of me that I can't consider any possibility without that. I can't be myself without that basic principle. So if it turns out an example of a moral foundation, a premise, an axiom is it's wrong to cause pain to someone for fun, to torture a small child for fun. If it turns out it wasn't wrong, I wouldn't know what to do with it. I couldn't make sense of it. I couldn't see and understand the world. So I start off with that as a basic principle, and then from that I build everything else. Even Torah, by the way, is like this. Torah is a whole complicated system of mitzvahs and morals and halachas and everything else. But what is it that means I have to listen to the Torah? Why should I listen to the Torah? Why should I? What's the principle upon which even listening to the Torah is built? And the answer is, well, Hashem commanded me. And why should I listen to what Hashem commanded me? So even the Torah gets down to a basic moral principle, something like, because Hashem owns the world, He created us, and therefore we owe Him hakaras hatov, we owe Him obedience, and therefore we need to listen. So there's a basic moral principle that lies at its foundation, which is that of hakaras hatov, of appreciation, of gratitude. And then from that, everything else can be built. But the first thing and the most basic thing has to be the moral principle, the axiom that's at work. So this is what Wolbe calls, in the sense, the bottom-up approach. It comes from within myself, and it's das because it's generated within myself. I'm almost created and born with that sense of way of dealing with the world and understanding things, which I use then to understand other things, but it's the foundations of everything I understand. Wolbe, though, is interested now in the second element of das, which is top-down, which comes from outside and penetrates into me, becomes part of me. And the reason he's interested in this is because this is really where the avodah of Musa, the self-work of Musa and character development starts. The things that are within me and come out of me, that sort of da'at is what I have, the axioms, the principles, the premises. But if we want to grow, we want to increase them, we want to enrich our inner life, we want more to form us and mold us and develop our character. The character forming means they mold the people we are. So we want them to become das. We don't want these just to be abstract ideas. We want it to become part of ourselves. But the way for it to become part of ourselves is by allowing that which is outside to penetrate deep within ourselves. And this, therefore, is the next section that Wolbe wants to discuss. And he says that these two psukim in Koheles that we quoted refer to these two elements of das. The one that we discussed last week, which is the da'at, that's the axioms from within myself that allow me to operate and do everything else. Those are from Mishli chapter 24, in which Das is given the comparison of the thing that furnishes the room. We have our own inner life, and we need to furnish the inner life of our minds. That's what we use to furnish the inner life of our minds. But in Mishli Gimel, it uses the metaphor of Badatu Tahom Mosif Ko, that the knowledge Das penetrates, breaks up, breaks in, cracks open the depths. This is the second sort of das, in which something comes from outside ourselves, but we want it to crack us open. We want it to penetrate deep within ourselves, and that's the second element of das. And this is what interests Wolbe and hopefully us as Bali Musas, people who want to grow, to talk about that which becomes part of us, that penetrates deep within us. So let's read Wolbe inside in this paragraph, in which he talks about the second sort of das, because in the last show we discussed the first sort of das. And this is at the bottom of page Lamed Base in the handouts, the bottom of the penultimate page, page 4 out of 5 in the handouts that I've given. Hageda Hasheni, the last two lines. Hageda Hasheni shel hadas, the second definition of das, who shehi bokas tahomos, is that it plumbs the depths. Zera kach hanifla hamakasher es haseichelim hamidot. This is the phenomenal force which joins, hamakasher from the word kesher, knots together, binds together, seichel, our abstract intelligence, with midot, with our character traits, with that which forms us into the people we are. Hu Hashem inspired by Perik HaKodem. This is what we discussed in the previous chapter. Behevdel, in the difference, and here we now turn over the next page of Wolbe to page Lamed Gimel, the final page of Wolbe in the third chapter in the second volume of his work. HaHevdel ben HaKlal Yisrael v'Umas HaOlam, the difference between Klal Yisrael and the nations of the world. Meaning to say, the difference between the model of accepting the Torah or not. Meaning to say, there are many great thinkers and moral people and fine people, both within our own people, within Klal Yisrael, and within the wider world. However, the unique quality of what the Torah wants to develop in us as members of Klal Yisrael is this quality of taking ideas and not allowing them just to sit there, but immediately translating them into action. As is well known, there are many philosophies and many faiths, many of which have beautiful and high ideals, often ideals that we share, values that we also think are important. The difference is that the Torah immediately wants to translate things into practice. It won't suffice with leaving these values in the abstract. It immediately wants to translate them into how can we actually achieve them, how can we actualize them. So we'll talk about virtues like love or charity, tzedakah, and many other faiths also talk about that. But immediately then we'll want to actualize it, make it lamaisa, tachlis. How would it work? What are the halachas that develop out of this? This is the word halacha, the path, holech, to go, the path that we follow. We don't want to lead it in the abstract, but we immediately want it to begin molding and forming us into the people we are. And therefore, we immediately ask, how should I give tzedakah? How much should I give? What's the best way of giving? Who should I give to? What should be the order of my priorities? How much should I tithe? And suddenly you have a whole volume of halacha around tzedakah. Carries on Wolbe in the top of page Lamed Gimel, the last page in this section. Alei Yisrael, the great ones of Israel. Kol ma she'HaKadosh Baruch Hu mashpia lahem gedolah. Everything that, all that Hashem showers them with greatness, they minimize and reduce themselves. Meaning someone who is showered with greatness, this could inflate them. This could develop and make them into a inflated ego, into a more arrogant person. But on the contrary, the unique quality of greatness which is given by Torah should be that it causes a person to minimize their ego. The more they know, to become more modest and more aware of the wisdom and chesed of Hashem in the world. The prime example of this, of course, being Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest knower of Hashem and Torah, and therefore, accordingly, the on of Mod Mikol Adam, the most modest person. Gedolei umas ha'olam, great people from the nations of the world, i.e. those who don't wish to accept Torah as a way of life. This is not a piece, by the way, in which the core distinctions between a Jew and a non-Jew. This isn't a sort of genetic difference, chas v'shalom. This is about acceptance of Torah as a way of life or not, and if one adopts the Torah model or not. Umas ha'olam, the great of the umas ha'olam, gadlussam aviyosam legaiva v'atiferes. If one rejects the Torah, then the greater one is, the more one knows, the more one has received, brings one to greater gava, greater arrogance for his powerless and self-glorification. And now Wolbe says an absolutely stunning and beautiful idea, a massively important one, in which he contrasts the figures of Bilam and Moshe. So this takes us back a couple of weeks, but I want to share with you a very profound and beautiful idea that he now says, contrasting Bilam and Moshe, both of whom, of course, we know, had an incredible awareness of Hashem. Bilam describes himself as Yodea Das Elyon. He knows the mind of Elyon, of the elevated God. In a moment, we'll see the Chazal, the very famous statement of the sages that he brings, that both Bilam and Moshe had a level of Nevuah that was on par. And yet, look how different they are. And he's going to discuss where this difference comes from. And therefore, he quotes the Pasuk, the second line on page Lamed Gimel, V'lo kom novi od b'Yisrael k'Moshe. In the almost obituary given to Moshe, right at the end of the Torah, it says, V'lo kom od b'Yisrael k'Moshe. No novi arose in Israel like Moshe. On which Chazal comment in the Medrash on the Pasuk in V'zos Avracha, where this obituary hesped of Moshe is given. What does it mean? V'lo kom novi od b'Yisrael k'Moshe. No novi arose in Israel amongst Kol Yisrael like Moshe. B'Yisrael come amongst the Jewish people, no novi arose like that. But come amongst the nations of the world, there was a novi who matched Moshe. The Ezazah, who is this? Bilam ben Ba'ar. This is Bilam ben Ba'ar. Bilam matches Moshe in terms of his intellectual awareness of Hashem. The common denominator between the two, was in the intellectual framework in their minds. Bilam also knew the mind of God. This was only referring to the mind of Hasaga, of intellectual insight. Sheba Chadorim Yamalu, which is the first sort of das that furnishes the rooms. This is about what a person understands from themselves. Achadaso bekas tohumus, the second sort of das, which is about knowledge penetrating deep within us, and forming us and molding our character into being certain sorts of people. That's another stage that goes on. Such a das has to penetrate into all the layers and personality qualities and midah qualities of people, character traits of people. We humans are made up of layers upon layers upon layers, some more superficial, some more profound, that make up our kochas hanefesh, our qualities, our skills, our attributes, our personality traits, And Das has to penetrate all of these. Mitaheres u'makadeshes osom, has to purify and sanctify all these layers. U'machaberes osom l'seichel, and bind them to the mind, to the seichel. What we know has to be bound to that which we are. Das sosia shall heves hayotzim in the kutos hakadusha shall nismos Yisrael. This is the spark that comes out of the point of kedusha within the soul of Klal Yisrael. V'nenu matzua eitzan mosa olam, and it can't be found amongst those who don't accept the Torah. They may know in theory the quality of character and mussar development, but in practical application they are distant from it. So here we get to something very profound, which we need to understand in the nature of Bilam and how he operates. And this is now what Wolbe explains. The Rashi comments on the idea: why is it that the Ummah Sa'olam, the nations world, were given a Novi like Bilam? And Rashi quotes the Medrash that answers that the Ummah Sa'olam, the nations of the world, would complain, and they would say, "What do you want from us? How can you complain that we didn't live up to the standards of Klal Yisrael? We never had a Novi. We never had a great leader like Moshe." To which Hashem responded, "Okay, I'll give you a Novi, Bilam, who will have the same awareness as Moshe, and you will see that not only does he not improve you, but actually you deteriorate through his leadership. He drives you into a worse direction to the one that you naturally and instinctively and previously had." And indeed, we see this is what Bilam did, who drove Klal Yisrael, the nations of the world, Ammon and Moav, in a terrible direction, in which he led to a deterioration in their moral standards through the terrible story of the daughters of Moab and the corrupt, adulterous, and immoral behavior. Now, this Rashi strikes one as being very unfair. If the nations of the world's complaint is a fair one, which is, how could we know any better if we weren't given a Novi, we weren't given a prophet? The Jewish people had a Moshe, but we didn't. Then how is it a response to give them a Bilam and say, you see, I've given you a prophet, it's a Bilam, and look what he did to you, he led you worse. Well, of course, if you give a nation who give a prophet who is such a corrupt and corroded and terrible and filthy individual as Bilam, then of course he's going to corrode the moral standards of those who hear his message. So how is this a fair response? It's not fair to give a Novi and then choose of all people a Bilam. And the answer to this question is that the very thing that corroded and corrupted Bilam, the very reason why he ended up being a force for evil, being a corrosive force that led Ammon and Moab to worse behavior than previously, was the Nevuah itself, was the very fact of him becoming a prophet himself. Because there's an interesting thing. How can it be that a Bilam had such a clarity of vision? How can it be that you could have Nevuah? Nevuah isn't just a gift that can be granted to anyone. Nevuah is an appreciation of the divine, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of being able to communicate and hear his word, which takes surely a cleanliness of mind, a purity of spirit, an ability to see and perceive without any distraction and without any clouding of the glass. Indeed, we know this is what made Moshe a Novi more than any other Novi. Moshe, who is Onov Ma'od, who has no ego in the way, he sees Hashem, as we're told in the Pasuk, but Aspakaria Hama'ira, through a clear glass. This is connected to this week's Sedra. Look at Rashi at the beginning of Matos, in which Rashi says that Moshe is Nisnave with Bezois or Bezer, with this. He's able to talk about the words of Hashem because he sees and understands the message with the clarity of vision. The other prophets, the other Nevi'im, only get a picture, they see it through a cloudy glass. Aspakaria She'ena Me'ira, and therefore the Nevuah is with the word so in such a manner Hashem spoke, but they're not able to say this is what Hashem said because they don't have the same clarity of vision. So what does it mean to say that there's a Bilam who has a clarity of vision that matches Moshe, who's able to receive prophecy with complete clarity? What about his nature, his physical drives, his ego that surely gets in the way of a clarity of vision? Even the great Nevi'im, the Yeshaya, the Yirmiyah, the Cheskel, the Eliyahu, can't see and can't be as aware of Nevuah as Moshe. They can't see through a cloudy glass because the little bit of self-interest and self-personality and physicality about them interferes with the complete clarity of vision. They're very spiritual, they're very pure, they're able to hear the words of Hashem, they're very removed from the distractions of drives and desires that corrode and corrupt and murky our ability to see things clearly, but nonetheless they can't see with the complete clarity of vision. Only a Moshe has removed himself so completely, in the words of the Zohar, that less megami klumi, has nothing of himself to interfere, and therefore can have a completely clear picture of the Nevuah. So how can a Bilam achieve this? What allows him to have such a level of Nevuah? And the answer is that Bilam had to work on himself, but work on himself in a very terrible and awful way. Because as Bilam grew as a Novi, every new piece of awareness he had about the greatness of Hashem, every extra bit of insight into spirituality, into morality, into holiness that he achieved, conflicted with the person he was. And there's two ways of living with yourself when that occurs. One way is to change the person you are, to refine yourself, to purify yourself, to spiritualize yourself, to begin living in a holier manner. So that one isn't living in a bifurcated way, in a broken way, in which what one knows doesn't contradict what one is. But there's another way to deal with it, which is to detach knowledge from action, to remove any desire to implement, to actualize that which one knows. Now, the reason why a great Novi's personality interferes with the character of the Nevuah is because of their quality as people, because they are determined to take that which they know and actualize it and become it. They can only know in an integrated way, in a whole body, in a holistic experience, and therefore their body interferes a little bit with the Nevuah. But if someone can decapitate themselves, if they can disconnect their head from their body, metaphorically, if they can say, you know what, I can know anything, and I don't care because it's not going to affect me in any way at all, then they can know with complete clarity and it won't interfere with their prophecy, the fact that they don't like what they're hearing, that they don't want to live with what they're hearing, because they don't care, they have no intention. Nothing that they're hearing in any way is going to affect how they behave. Let me give a moshel of this. I may have a bias and a desire to rationalize if I intend to be an honest person. So I'm driving along and my car scratches someone else, or I have a business conversation with someone, or I have a disagreement with the babysitter about how much I ought to pay. And I rationalize it. No, I don't really owe this because he said that and she said that and this happened. Why am I rationalizing it? Because I care about honesty. Maybe I don't care enough about honesty to think straight, but I care somewhat about honesty. And therefore I need to rationalize and find excuses. But if I have absolutely no intention to pay, I don't care at all about honesty, I'm perfectly comfortable in my skin in being a thief, then I've no need to rationalize it. I'll recognize the truth. You know what? You're absolutely right. I owe you the money. This is completely crooked. I've got no defense. It's my fault. I have to pay this, but I have no intention of doing so. So paradoxically, removing any intention to act in accordance with what one knows is another route to removing any bias. And if someone can completely rid themselves, completely separate that which they know from that which they are, then they can have a clarity of vision like a Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu has a clarity of vision because his body is completely subsumed to his soul, to his mind, to his clarity of Nevuah. Another Novi can't have a clarity of vision because there's a tension between the two. But there's another way to resolve the tension, to have a complete clarity of vision because one is a head without a body, because one has absolutely no intention of allowing what one knows to in the least way interfere with the body. There's another character, by the way, who was so bifurcated, so separated, that he was completely at one with himself. And this is Lavan. Lavan is referred to as Lavan because he was white. He was cleaner than clean. Lavan, when he lied and tricked Yaakov, would have passed every lie detector in the book. Because a lie detector works by picking up the tension we feel when we say a lie. It picks up sweating and it picks up tensing and blood pressure going up and other such things. And that's how whether a lie detector works accurately or inaccurately, but to some degree it picks up the inner tension when we tell a lie. Because we feel conflicted. Because we're tense as we're lying. But what happens if someone is so comfortable with lying that there's no conflict at all, no tension at all, because they completely disregard truth. Truth means nothing to them whatsoever, then there'll be no tension at all. They'll be completely relaxed and at one in their lying. And this is a Lavan. He's white and white. He's passed every lie detector in the book. Interestingly, Chazal, Targum Yonason and others, Gemara, link the characters of Lavan and Bilam. They say who Lavan, who Bilam. Now, whenever Chazal link two different characters together, like in last week's Sedra, they say Pinchas is Eliyahu, it's difficult to know what they mean. Do they mean this literally, that they were one person who lived a very long life? Do they mean this spiritually, that they shared somehow the same soul in some form of Gilgal or reincarnation? Or do they mean this midrashically, they're trying to tell us an insight, an idea, that there's a character trait, the characteristics are in common, that the same sort of person representing the same value, the same way of life, but acting it out differently. So whatever they mean, they're linking in this medrash, Lavan and Bilam, and they're saying there's a common denominator between the two, because they both share this complete clarity and transparency. There's no conflict in either of them. They go through life feeling completely relaxed and at one with themselves. That which they know and that which they're doing, no sense of inner conflict at all, because they don't see that the two need to link whatsoever. And here comes the paradox. Bilam starts off as a Bilam. He's not completely detached in this manner. But the more he knows, the more Nevuah he receives, without willing to change in the process, the more it wrenches him apart, the more it stretches his head away from his body, breaking off and decapitating the two, breaking any link between that which he knows and that which he does. So every extra spiritual insight he gets can either be positive, it can build a person and make you into a better person because you take the spiritual insight and you grow from it. But if you refuse to grow from it, if you have no interest in change, then every extra insight one gets detaches one more, bifurcates one more, separates more between that which we know and that which we do. Until eventually completely broken, the two. The neck is snapped. The link between body and soul is completely broken. The link between his mind, that which he knows and that which he does, is completely detached. And he feels no conflict whatsoever. So the worst spiritual experience in the world is prophecy for a Bilam. Because the more he gets prophecy, the worse it makes him. Because the more it detaches him from actualization, and therefore the more it lowers him and makes him completely immune to any spiritual insight. And this is the message of Hashem to the Ummah Olam, to the people of the world, who complain and they say, we were never given prophecy. Now they have an option, they can accept the Torah. They were offered the Torah, every nation was offered the Torah. As a nation, Hashem went round from nation to nation. As individuals, if they want, they can choose to become Gerim, they can accept Torah. But they're not saying that. They're saying we want to stay not as members of Ummah Olam. We don't want to accept the Torah. But you can't blame us for being the way we are, because at least we should have had Nevuah, prophecy. We don't want the Torah with all the halachas and the rules, but we want the intellectual insight and understanding. Says Hashem, fine, I'll give you a Bilam. I'll give you all the intellectual insight and understanding, and you will see that not only will that not make you better, but it will make you worse. It will detach you from anything spiritual till it leads to the terrible advice and the immorality that Bilam led. And we ask the question, how is it fair? If you give someone a Bilam, why is that a fair response? You give them a terrible Navi. And the answer is, this is what they were asking for. The very definition of giving a Navi, but saying, but we don't want the practical implications of it, we don't want the Torah that results, we don't want the halachic system, is saying we want knowledge without actualization. We want head without penetration into the people we are. We don't want das, we want chokhmah and bina, but we don't want to internalize it and make it tahomis yivkoru, that it should mold and form and crack open the depths within ourselves. And if one doesn't want that, then inevitably the result will be someone who's all head, all mind, with all the knowledge in the world, but no actualization, and therefore who has to have detached their physical selves, their body, their behavior from any insight, and therefore the body falls to the lowest animalistic behavior possible. And therefore this is what happens to a Bilam. Bilam can sing the most glorious words, he can create Torah. Bilam is the author of Psukim in the Torah, all the beautiful Psukim of the brachos of Bilam that we say in our tefillah. How can he create Torah? Because there's a crystal clear awareness of Hashem. But there's no body, there's no actualization that follows. And the clearer his awareness, the worse his behavior has to become, because he needs to detach the two. So at the start of life, Bilam, maybe he cares about ideas and he does try and internalize things a little bit and live a decent life. But the greater the awareness he gets without a willingness to change, the more he has to corrode and corrupt himself in the process. Now, this is a profound idea in the Parsha of Bilam. This is an insight that Wolbe is sharing with us when we talk about the quality of Das, and he contrasts Moshe to Bilam. And of course, it's also relevant to all of us, because it's telling us the danger of hearing ideas and not actualizing them and changing them oneself. There's no such thing as neutral. If one hears an inspiring shir, if one learns a new halacha, if one hears a story that makes one, or has an experience that makes one more aware of Hashem, and we don't actualize it, then we can't stand still. Either we get the inspiration and grow from it, or we get the inspiration and don't grow from it, but then we don't remain neutral. We've bifurcated, we've separated ourselves a little bit, we've detached our physical selves from our minds, and we've made it a little bit harder to bridge the gap. Okay, we all make mistakes, that happens, but as long as in general we're on a life in which we're conscious of this work of the Baal Musa that Wolbe is telling us about, in which we need to connect and internalize everything we experience, this is the avodah of Musa. So avodah Musa is not just to suffice with the abstract knowledge, it has to be internalized, it has to be made real, it has to be made part of us. Otherwise, we risk becoming like a Bilam, that the more we know, it causes us to be the worse that we get. By the way, this is the continuation of the Bilam story. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, it's not our parsha this week, but just very briefly, this is the continuation of the story in which Bilam has this remarkable and bizarre and strange experience of a talking donkey. And this is the most strange thing in the world, because the donkey can't speak. The donkey is an animal, the donkey doesn't speak. What's this nace, this miracle that happens in which a donkey speaks? And one idea of this nace is that Hashem is saying to him, this is what you are. You're a donkey that speaks. It's a complete rupture and break between the two parts of you. You have the mind of a Navi, a mind of a Moshe Rabbeinu, and the body of an animal. And this is the donkey. The speech in no way reflects the holistic experience of the donkey. Normally when we speak, hopefully, it's part of ourselves. It's our inner self expressing itself. But one can speak in a way in which there's a complete rupture between the two, a complete disconnection, and that's you, Bilam. You are a talking donkey. This is the theme of our Parsha this week, of Parshas Matos. Parshas Matos opens with the concept of Hataras Nadorim, the idea of speech, the idea that speech should be the link between our minds and our bodies, should be the link between these two parts of ourselves. It should express ourselves. Speech is generated from the throat, which is in the neck, which is the part that joins the head and the body. And the Pasuk says, Lo yachal devarim, don't let your words become chulin. And this is the whole concept of the severity of Nadorim. This is why in Yom Kippur we open with Hataras Nadorim, with Kol Nidre. That's why we do Hataras Nadorim before Rosh Hashanah, because when we arrive in that time of the year, Yom Kippur Rosh Hashanah is that neck. It's the link between the head and the body, that linking time in the year. And therefore we need to ensure that we've dealt with that side of things. This is Parshas Matos, which continues and is a continuation of the story of Pinchas and Balak, and this quality of individual who is a Bilam, who the metaphor of whom is the talking donkey, which Hashem shows him. So this is Wolbe's continuation, in which he gives the second meaning of the word das, not das as in the das that we generate. That's the first das, the axioms, the principles, the premises, the assumptions, both in logic and morality, that we find within ourselves, that come from us. But das is also that which is intimately and personally connected to us, is bound up to us from that which has come outside and become part of us. These are the lessons in life that we've learned, which become so much part of us that it's inconceivable. We don't know what it would mean to be me without this being part of what I know. In the same way as someone who discovers that a basic principle of logic is untrue, doesn't know how to live with it, they can't process anything because it just doesn't make sense. So they discover that basic idea of morality is untrue. Yeah, it's absolutely fine to torture small children for fun. If one would have a break in those basic premises and axioms and principles that we use to navigate life, one wouldn't know how to function. The other sort of das are things that have become like that, ideas that we've got from outside, which have penetrated so deeply within us that we can't conceive of ourselves without these ideas. And this is the culmination of Avodas HaMussar. This is what it means to achieve the peak of Mussar work, if one's able to make these ideas into parts of oneself, that they mold us into the people we are. I'll just finish off now, the last page of Wolbe. He says, Mokum Hadas Habakas Tahomas Midas, it's in Midas, and then he cites a long piece of Rambam in Hilchos Deos, which I'm not going to go through now because we've learned it previously. This is the Rambam who discusses what midas are and speaks about the derech habenoni, the middle path that we're meant to form. We're meant to avoid the two extremes, the extreme of miserliness, in which we're unable to share a penny, but the extreme of spending money carelessly. We're meant to find the middle path in that. We're meant to find the middle path in our engagement with physicality. We're not meant to be so immersed in physicality that we just become physical beings, but we're not meant to be so removed from it that we live a lifestyle in which we starve ourselves and don't operate within the physical world. We're meant to be part of the physical world, and so on and so forth. The same with happiness and sadness. We're not meant to be so joyous that we're just party animals, but we're not going to be so sad that we are just depressed. We're meant to find a middle path. This is the famous middle path of the Rambam that we discussed when we learned the Rambam in Hilchos Deos. So that's the quote he has in the middle, and we're now going to read the final paragraph of Wolbe in this chapter. Haderech habeinonis b'midas, the middle path in midot. This is at the bottom of page Lamed Gimel. Hi hadas. This is what we mean by da'at. We discussed this is why the Rambam calls this section of halacha hilchot deot. In modern Hebrew, in the Hebrew of the Bali Musa and so on, we call these midas character traits. But the Rambam calls character traits deos because da'at is our ideas, our conceptual framework that has molded us into certain sorts of people, and therefore he calls these character traits deos. They start off as very intellectual ideas. We learn a piece of Rambam. Rambam is an intellectual work, as we discussed when we learned these Rambams, and we talk philosophically about the different extremes and how we find a middle path. But then we need to actualize it, then we need to do it and make it part of ourselves. And the Rambam speaks about various tools as to how we can make these things part of ourselves. One of the tools he talks about is Adam Nimshach Achachitsonios, the environment, the externals, the people we mix with, the people we talk to, how we behave externally, even if there's no one around us who shares our values. That's one way of molding ourselves. The second way of molding ourselves he speaks about is working on maybe going to one extreme in order to go back to the middle, to find the middle path. So if someone has an extreme in their behavior, one way, then they should go to a little bit edge, more extreme to the other way, so that they can find a path in the middle, and the various tools that the Rambam talks about character growth, and carries on with Wolbe. Zehu inyan tikkun hamidus. This is the work of, or the idea of tikkun hamidot, of repairing and fixing our midas. She'adam yisnaig bohem kafi shikol hadas. The person should behave in line with the shikol hadas. Shikol is the word lishakel, to weigh up, the weighing up of their minds. We need to weigh up what we need to be, and then behave in accordance with that. That is what we mean by midas. So effectively, and I remind you again, this Wolbe is part of an extended argument throughout the chapter that we make a mistake if we think of Midas as being driven by emotions, as being driven by our character. It needs to start off with the power of clarity of reason. Remember Wolbe 2 pages back, in which he cited from various Rishonim that the primary source that we have to know Hashem, to link to Hashem, to connect with Hashem is our head. We then need to integrate that knowledge, which is what the second section is about, down to us. But if we ask ourselves, what's the place of Siyata D'Shmaya? Where can we receive Hashem in our lives? What's the utensil, the kli kibbul, the container that we have that can receive the bracha from Hashem? The answer is our minds, our heads. So we have Hashem, who metaphorically is above us, showering down upon us spirituality, received by our head. That's the seichel, that's the mind, that's the route we have to know Hashem. That's the only way we can know Hashem. And then needing to go via the neck, integrated into the rest of ourselves, which is what the avoda of Midas is. This is Wolbe's argument. He's arguing, if you like, a sort of Lithuanian, Litvish model of spirituality, which is that one can't just arouse emotion and get oneself into a very spiritual experience of a kumzit or a dance or a song, unless one knows what it is one's integrating, unless one knows what the ideas that one wants to bring into oneself. In Musa, there's a lot of an idea of learning things with this slavus, with energy, with fiery engagement. But one has to know what one is trying to fierily engage with. So one can learn, let's say, a passage in Mesilas Yesharim, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the Ramchal's classic Musa work, and we can read with great gusto a line in which he says, the tachlis, the purpose of a person is lios odom hasholim, to be a perfect person. But if we haven't thought about what the words Odom HaSholim means, and we think the translation of the word perfect person is someone who looks beautiful, who dresses stunningly, someone who's worked out in the gym and has an amazing physical prowess, someone who manages to convince everyone that they're perfect, someone who's all powerful and is a tyrannical politician. If that's what we think is a perfect person, if we think a perfect person is someone who's accumulated great wealth, then we'll enter into the Musa Seder and we'll learn with great gusto, I have to be a perfect person, I have to be an Odom HaSholim. And we'll mean by that these terrible things. So one first has to start intellectually understanding what is a perfect person, and only then can the kumsits follow, only then can the emotions follow, only then can the fiery engagement and enthusiastic spiritual experiences follow. Wolbe is arguing that we should be skeptical about spiritual experiences. Sometimes we can go through and someone can say, I feel a bit flat, I feel a bit unengaged, I don't feel inspired. And you ask them what they mean by inspiration, and they mean when they get into things. Now, of course that's good, of course we should feel inspired. But it's also important to realize there's a time when one shouldn't feel inspired, when one should be engaging in thought and self-awareness and self-insight and learning of Torah to understand what it is that we're meant to be, how we're meant to be, and then the inspiration can follow that. So one can have tremendous inspiration and it can be worthless because it can be inspiration without any insight and therefore not directed in the right way. And similarly, there can be times in our life in which we're not having the external inspiration, we don't have that energy, but we're growing and learning and to appreciate ourselves, to understand, and that's the spiritual work that's taking place, which then can be internalized through the inspiration that follows. So inspiration is important, but it's a double-edged sword. Inspiration from what? About what? What is it that we're integrating into ourselves? That argues with Wolbe first has to start off as intellectual, it first has to start off as insight. And a life which is all inspiration is not a good life. A life has to have that insight, that hard-plodding work, that Talmud Torah. When you're sitting there learning with the Chavrusa, when you're learning halacha, when you're learning self-development, you're not feeling that same energy as maybe you feel in a wonderful Kabbalah Shabbos or when one's on a spiritual high. But one needs to do that work. Once one's received that from above, that Siyata D'Shmaya, the insight, that spirituality, then that can become internalized into the person that one is. And therefore we read the last lines of Wolbe. This is the knowledge which penetrates the depths, which plumbs into us, becomes part of us. In all areas of midah and character development. Hadas bin Das has to be able to decide between the two extremes, as per the Rambam. That there is in every character trait. That's hard work. That's difficult, that's thought. If someone says, which midas should I work on? And you get a simplistic answer, well, work on anova, work on being modest, work on chesed, then that means one hasn't understood what Wolbe is arguing is midah, is character trait. One has to put in the hard work of thinking carefully about each quality, each character trait, knowing what are the two extremes, knowing what's the middle path that one needs to aim for, knowing where am I in that path, where am I along that spectrum of behavior? Do I need to veer rightwards? Do I need to veer leftwards in order to get the balance? That takes a lot of intellectual work and thought and insight. And that starts, then one needs to take that das and actualize it. The more the das becomes strengthened in a person, it digs deeper penetrates more deeply into all the midot, and therefore directs them in the right way. Zuhi hadas shehi ha'odom shaba'odom. This is the das, which is the person within the person. Meaning to say, if we think of the world which is mechanical, unthinking processes, the laws of science, the weather cycle, the earth, gravity, everything that takes place in the external mechanical world. And in that world is Odom, the one reflective thinking being. Within ourselves, we need to find the Odom Shabbat, the inner person within us, the person of the person. We ourselves are capable of being unreflective and mechanical. We're also bodies, we're also physical. But if we want to know what's the person within me, the deepest person within me, the most absolute self-expression of personness, it's that which is reflective, that which is thinking, that which is das, which then molds the rest of us to follow. That's the leader within us. And this is Rav Wolbe's conclusion in this chapter of Mahu Ha'odom, what it is that is a person. So with this, we conclude this chapter of Rav Wolbe's thoughts about what a person is. And with this, we will finish this section of learning. We're going to take a break now for a few weeks until after the summer is over, the summer break is over, and then we will then resume. In the meantime, please get back to me if there's particular topics you would like to cover. I'm going to do a little bit of market research to see what topics people want. I was initially asked to give this share quite textual based, and therefore we've stuck quite closely to the text of Rav Wolbe. But it may be that there's other thinkers that you want to do, or it may be that a model that isn't textual based but is more other ideas is a better model. So please give me feedback and get back to me via the organisers of Lehava directly about what you might be looking for. But for now, that concludes this section of Alei Shur. And as I said, we're going to take a pause now till after the summer holiday, and in Yetz Hashem, in time for Elul, resume our learning together, and again, we'll either focus on something more philosophical or more Musa and see how that goes. But for now, I thank you so much for joining. Really honoured that you all take part. And I wish you a positive conclusion to the 3 weeks and a good summer break. And we'll resume in about a month's time after the summer break in time for Elul. So I wish you all the best. Thank you so much.